Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, and welcome to another recap here on the C Squared podcast channel. We start a journey in Bucharest, Romania, with day one of the 2023 Superbet Chess Classic. This is the first stop of the Grand Chess Tour. We have the best chess players on the planet, except Magnus Carlsen. Magnus is going to join in the later stages of the Grand Chess Tour. We're going to see him in Poland, which is going to follow immediately after this one, and then in Croatia as well. So, day one, we're going to be focusing on Fabiano's games. On this one, Fabiano starts with the white pieces. He's facing Bogdan Daniel Deac. Bogdan Daniel Deac is a 21 years of age, homegrown talent from Romania. He's also the wild card in this event. Super Grandmaster, 2700, very, very sharp player. Fabi with the white pieces, Bogdan Daniel Deac with the black pieces. Let's get straight into the action. Fabi opens up with 1 d4, knight to f6, c4, e6, and knight to c3. Fabi invites the Nimzo. Bogdan Daniel Deac decides to go with the Nimzo, which is his typical defense. And now the big first moment, let's say, because of course white has a lot of options. They can play the move a3, e3 is an option, queen to c2 is one of the main option, bishop to g5, another move in this position. But of course, knight to f3 is not necessarily more of an offbeat line, but a move that we haven't seen being explored at the elite level, at least not in recent times as much. Castle, the very typical reply, bishop to g5, c5, a very aggressive approach. Of course, black can also play the move h6, d5, I would assume, is also a move in this position, though c5 is considered to be the main attraction in the position. You have to attack the center as fast as possible, and this is exactly what black is doing. c5, rook to c1, defending the knight on c3 and getting ready to take on c3 with the rook later on in the later stages of the game. C takes d4, knight takes d4, very typical reply. Of course, you can also take with the queen, but after knight to c6, this doesn't make too much sense, despite of the fact that you can go queen to h4 and solidify this pin on the h4 d8 diagonal. I can, since I did not exchange my bishop pawn before for the knight on c3, I can just simply retreat with the move a bishop to e7, and that gives black a very, very good position. Now, let's get back to the game continuation. Knight takes d4, h6, and bishop to h4. White tries to establish the spin on the h4 d8 diagonal and say that, look, since I didn't take with the queen, if you do go back with a move bishop to e7 and try to defend against this pin, then I can just simply go either e3, maybe even e4 in one move, and say that I just simply have a better position. I'm better developed. I'm going to go bishop e2, castle, I have the center. It feels like white is definitely in the driver's seat. So, of course, black does not go for that. This is still theory. d5, immediately attacking the center. C takes d5, and this is a big moment in the game because black's main option is in fact not the move that he played in the game, which is bishop takes c3, but rather g5 in the position. Of course, you can also go queen to d5, but g5 is the main move, and we will understand the differences between these few moves in just a second. Bear with me. g5, bishop to g3, queen takes d5, and now the move a3, for example, can be met with bishop takes c3, and now white doesn't have to take back with a rook. White can just simply take with the b pawn, and you can do that even by not necessarily playing the move a3, but rather, instead of a3, you can also play the move e3, and that pretty much forces black to accept a pawn sacrifice, which can be extremely dangerous. For example, if you just simply go something along the lines of knight to c6, just play the position instinctively, get the pieces out, it just simply doesn't work, because right now I will take on c6, queen takes c6, and then something along the lines of a3. This rook is nicely placed on the c file. you're in big trouble in this position as black. You can go bishop to e7, you can go bishop to c3. The key difference in the position is that you already committed to the move g5. And once you commit to this move, you have to expect a pretty vicious attack on the king side coming from a white's side. For example, h4 is going to come. Then if you go g4, perhaps with a bishop on e2, I'm going to put a lot of pressure on the pawn on g4, but also whenever I go h4, for example, let's say bishop to e7, though I have a feeling even other moves except the move h4 can give white quite a significant advantage, maybe even knight to b5. Basically, the way I look at the position, you still have huge problems with the development of the bishop on c8 and the rook on a8. This side of the board just hasn't developed yet for black, the left side of the board, the queen side, and that's a problem. Also, your king very, very weak on g8. So after a move g5, bishop to g3, and queen takes d5, e3, black is forced to play queen takes a2. And let's take a look at what's happening in this position. And I found some amazing, by the way, I am not helping Fabi in this tournament. I'm sometimes his second helper, however you want to put it. But in this tournament, I'm in fact doing a lot of commentary for the St. Louis Chess Club, the official broadcast. So I'm not helping him. I don't have any idea of what he prepared for this game. So I'm just speculating. Just like you guys, I'm just speculating. I don't have any inside information. So queen takes a2. Queen to c2 is an option, and I have a feeling there's other options as well, such as bishop to d3, for example, sacrificing another pawn, saying that, okay, take on b2. Now I'm going to castle. I'm only focused on finishing my development. And this is quite significant because after castle, bishop takes c3, I have this idea of rook to c2. Right now, black has a piece and a couple of pawns advantage in the position, but it's not that easy, and white in fact has a lot of compensation. For example, I can start with the move rook to c2, and now if you try to go queen to b4, which you probably have to, you can take on d4, but unfortunately after rook takes b2, bishop takes b2, despite the fact that you have a lot of material for the queen, you have a rook and a couple of pieces and a couple of pawns. This bishop on b2 is lost after queen to b3. You don't have bishop to e5, that's going to be captured by the bishop. There's no other square that is not protected by my pieces as white. You're going to lose the bishop on b2. You're going to have to face a very, very difficult task of trying to defend this position. Probably objectively losing for black at this point. So after rook to c2, you have to go queen to b4. The problem is that after knight to b5, right now, again, it's the question, where do you put the bishop on c3? You cannot go to e5, and this is the key idea behind the position in the early stages of the opening. Once you play the move g5 and bishop to g3, I control also this very, very important square e5, and the bishop can never go back via e5. Bishop to b2, for example, is met by bishop to d6. You have huge problems in this position still. With perfect play, if you don't play the move bishop to d2, if you play the move e5 in the position, perhaps objectively black is doing just fine. At the same time, the position is so complicated, and after rook to c3, I'm going to be a couple of pawns down as white. Nevertheless, I have so much compensation. Look at this knight coming to c7, trapping the rook in the later stages of the game, potentially h4 as well to open you up on the king side. And the dark square bishop, once it opens up after the move h4, if you do take on h4 and exchange that couple of pawns, well, this guy on g3, this bishop on g3 is going to become a monster. So don't do that. This one, maybe or maybe not, was what Fabi was planning on playing. But Deak, and I'm digressing already, Deak did not play this, and he played a very intriguing move. The people in the broadcast also were kind of wondering, Yasser and Nazi and Varakobian, they were wondering, why did he take on c3? And this is what Bogdan Daniel Deak did. We will understand in just a second, because right now, for example, if you do take with the b pawn, we've seen this idea of taking with the b pawn, there's a big problem. because I don't have to play the move g5 anymore. If I play the move g5, bishop to g3, and once again white is doing just fine, because after g5 you weaken your king. I'm going to be able to anchor this pawn on g5, hook it, in fact not necessarily anchor it, hook it with the move h4. Huge problems, your king is extremely weak. But I don't have to do that as black. I can just simply play queen takes d5. And if you do take on f6, you're saying that, sure, you messed up my structure, but right now the king is in fact very safe. And I also have the better structure because the pawn on c3 is not a tremendous pawn in the position for white. I'm going to go knight to c6, rook to d8. My king is perfectly safe on a g8. You just simply don't have enough resources to get to my king and create an attack. So this position is looking quite good for black. For this particular reason, after bishop takes c3, he did not take with the b pawn, he took with the rook g5, and now a bishop to g3. Of course, if you do take on d5 right now, with the rook swinging on the third rank, this gives white a tremendous advantage. You take on f6, g takes f6, queen to d2, followed by rook to g3 or rook to h3, piling on the pressure against the pawn on h6. This one is looking great for white. So g5 was played, bishop to g3, queen to d5, and f3. Fabiano, by the way, was still blitzing out his moves. So playing a very intriguing game. Very good preparation, I have to say. At this point, as you can see, he still has 1 hour and 30 minutes on his clock against 1 hour and 18 minutes for Bogdan Daniel Deac, who, by the way, he's a thinker. He enjoys thinking a lot. He very often gets himself in time trouble situations. So he might have still been within his theoretical knowledge and opening preparation at this point, and just trying to, spending 12 minutes or whatever he spent up to this point, trying to remember what his notes were saying. Let's take a look. f3, e5, knight to c2, queen takes d1, inviting the trade of the queens, king takes d1, and we have this position. We're entering a very intriguing endgame. 2 bishops for white, bishop on f1, which is a little bit out of play for the moment, but I will be able to open it up with the move e4 later on. And this is the key in the position. If you, for example, play the very instinctive knight to c6, just simply develop the knight and defend the pawn on e5, there's a big problem. I go e4, and now this pawn on e4, not only that it opens up my bishop, but it also dominates this complex of pawns dominate the knight on f6. You cannot go knight to d5, you cannot go knight to g4. You probably have to go knight to h5, but the thing is, once you play the move knight to h5, you're not doing it with a tempo like you could be doing it as in the game. We will see in just a second with the move knight to d5. It doesn't attack my rook, it doesn't force my bishop to move from g3. So I'm basically just simply gaining a tempo as white, a crucial tempo, by the way. This is a very concrete position, concrete endgame position, and I can just simply play the move bishop to b5, keep the rook on c3, pile on the pressure on the knight on c6. If you do take, that gives you another weakness that I can potentially target on the h file, the pawn on h6. So this one is just simply bad news. In fact, at this point, I'm not going to say that black is objectively losing, but he's not in good shape. All right, let's get back to the game. After the move king to d1, once again, as black, you don't have to play instinctively, but you have to play very concrete and connect your moves to the initiative in the position. You have to play forced, fast moves. You have to play very, very fast in the position. And this is exactly what Bogdan Daniel Deac recognizes and he starts doing. With the move rook to d8, that's a check. King to e1, Fabi was still more or less blitzing out his moves. Knight to d5, again, knight to c6 is going to be met by the move e4 once again. Knight to d5, a tempo, gaining a tempo on the rook on c3, rook to d3, creating this pin, but I can defend the rook on d8 by also developing my piece with the move knight to c6, and this is exactly what black has to do. Again, you have to be extremely careful. You cannot defend with the move f6. That will allow me to attack the knight on d5. That's a tremendous speed. You're going to lose the rook on d8. You don't want to see that on the board. Knight to c6, e4, knight to f4. Very important move, because otherwise if you place knight anywhere else, I'm going to capture on d8, and then you're going to lose the pawn on e5. We don't want to see that on the board as black. So he plays the move knight to f4, rook takes d8, knight takes d8, bishop to f2. White is trying to reshuffle his pieces. Once again, take advantage of the fact that you have the two bishops, set them up on active squares. This bishop on f2 is attacking the rook on, the pawn on a7 is forcing this rook on a8 to stay connected to the defense of the pawn on a7. It's definitely a very, very good piece, right? Also, look at this knight on f4. At some point, I'm going to kick it back with the move g3. Let's see what happened in the game. Bishop to e6, b3, defending the pawn on a2, a5, g3 once again, as we were predicting. Kick the knight from the f4 square, because that knight, I have to say, has a beautiful square. Has to be kicked out. Knight to a5, and this is a very, once again, concrete position. What is black's plan? Black is trying to liquidate the pawns on the queen side, and the way he can do that is through this move a4, setting up the pressure on these two pawns, a2 and b3. I have to get in time to defend those pawns. And how do you do that? Well, we shall see in just a second. King to d2, Fabi is going towards the c3 square, defend the pawn on b3 likewise. a4, king to c3, a takes b3, a takes b3, and g4 is a very concrete position for black. Black needs to create some weaknesses, and he needs to use those weaknesses as balance against the obvious strategic advantage that white has in the position, and that is the two bishops. Take on g4, knight to f6, and this is what I'm talking about, the balance in the position that black is trying to restore. You have a couple of targets that you can focus your attention on as black, and that's going to force some of white's resources to the defense of those pawns. Bishop to d3, you cannot allow black to capture the pawn on e4. That is a crucial pawn in the position. If you lose that, you're probably going to be in a worse position. So Fabi understands that. It's quite easy to understand that for an elite level player such as himself. Defends it with the move bishop to d3, bishop takes g4, knight to b4, setting up this idea of potentially knight to d5, exchanging the knight on a d5 and creating this very dangerous passed pawn. You're looking for some imbalance in the structure right now as white. You're looking for a passed pawn. If you do get a passed pawn with the help of the two bishops, that passed pawn is probably going to promote. So black cannot allow that to happen. He plays the move rook to c8 first, king to b2, and bishop to f3. And this is exactly what we were discussing. Black is trying to target the pawn on e4, trying to target the weaknesses, newly created weaknesses in white's position, and force white to spend a lot of resources to defend those weaknesses. Rook to e1, knight to c6, bishop to c5, and despite the fact that the computer is right now saying the position is very balanced, 0-0-0, I was looking at the game, and in fact, funny story. This is when Gary is also Gary Kasparov, or also known as Gary Chess. We're talking about Chess 2.0. Gary came to the studio where I'm doing my analysis for the broadcast, and he started looking at the game on my screen. And he was saying that Fabi has some serious chances. Two bishops, and this is what he says, two bishops are two bishops. He's going to be able to make use of these two bishops and put a lot of pressure on his opponent. And let's not forget, this is move 30. Right now, Bogdan Daniel Deac, check the time right now, 12 minutes and 20 seconds for the next 10 moves. That's not a lot. They go by really, really fast, especially in such a difficult position. Let's see what happened. Knight to d7, attack the bishop on c5, bishop to d6, knight takes b4, bishop takes b4, and knight to c5. Black is playing in a very aggressive, very concrete manner. The problem is, right now, Fabi had quite a tremendous chance. He could have taken on c5, and this is a very counterintuitive move. He played the move bishop to c4, which, by the way, also makes a lot of sense, but bishop to c5 would have placed a lot of A lot of difficulties in the position for a black. A rook takes c5 and now a rook to f1. Everything comes with tempo. You have to get this bishop out. Probably not to g2, because if you go rook to g2, rook to f5 is going to come, and that's going to set up tremendous pressure against the pawn on e5. I have an immediate threat. For example, if you go king g7, I go b4, and that's going to win the pawn on e5. The rook doesn't have where to go. This one is controlled. a5 is controlled by the pawn as well. d5 is controlled by the other pawn as well. So this one not looking good for a black. Bishop to g2, quite a difficult move to make. As black, you probably instinctively want to get out with the move bishop to g4. The problem is the game continues. I go bishop to c4, attack the pawn on f7, and you have to take a very passive stance with the move rook to c7. If you play bishop to e6, that's problematic. Bishop takes e6, f takes e6, and now I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I basically have an extra pawn on the king side because of your double pawns on the e file, and I can just simply go rook to c1, blackmail you with the exchange of the rooks. If you take on c1, I take back on c1, and this is a winning endgame. I'm going to be able to create a passed pawn. Well, first I'm going to force you to defend with your king against my invasion on the queen side, and then taking advantage of the fact that your king is going to be stuck to the defense of the queen side, I'm just simply going to push my pawns on the king side, create the passed pawn, win the game. Quite easy, quite thematic in this position. So of course, I want to say that after bishop takes c5, black would have had significant difficulties to maintain equality. He did not play that. He played the much more natural, I have to say, bishop to c4. It makes a lot of sense. You want to attack the pawn on f7 after rook to f1. It still maintains the advantage. And in fact, black reacted very badly in the position. He played the move bishop to h5, which gave Fabiano a golden opportunity to take full control in this position with this move. Very pretty move, I have to say, the move g4. You cannot take on g4, of course, because after rook to g1, h5, taking advantage of the pin with h3, you're pretty much busted. So you cannot do that. After g4, you have to go bishop to g6. But once again, after bishop takes c5, rook takes c5, and this is my guess. At this point, Fabiano was not even thinking about exchanging the dark square bishop for the knight on c5, perhaps. This is my assumption. Nevertheless, after bishop to d5, let's try to understand the difference in activity of the pieces in the position. Look at this bishop on g6. It's not going anywhere. It's attacking a very nicely protected pawn on e4. The bishop on d5, on the other hand, its counterpart is just an incredible piece. Attacks the pawn on b7, attacks the pawn on f7, defends the pawn on e4. It's just such a magnificent piece. Also, you're not on the right side with your king. You would love to have your king on the other side of the board, because I'm going to start playing the moves such as rook to c1, blackmail you once again with the exchange of the rooks, and then with the invasion of my king on the queen side. This is the big problem in the position for black. If these two pawns would be eliminated from the board, black is going to be just fine. The problem is that's not that easy. That's not how chess works. Cool. So rook to c1, rook to a1, rook to a7 to activate the rook like that is also an option. It's just such a beautiful position for white, and I have to say probably at this point black would have had tremendous problems holding equality. Let's see what happened in the game. Fabiano played the move rook to c1, b6, bishop to d2, king to g7, bishop to e3, just wasting too much time to get this bishop back to e3. Bishop to g4 and b4. Natural, of course, because you do want to play this move b4, kick the knight away from c5 without exchanging the bishop, the dark square bishop, which gives you the bishop pair advantage, strategical advantage that we've been talking about since the beginning of this endgame. Nevertheless, unfortunately, from a practical perspective and an objective perspective as well, you're just simply losing too many tempes. knight to d7, king to b3, h5, rook to a1. White is still looking good in the position. Bishop to f3 to attack the pawn on e4. Bishop takes f7, and probably at this point, this was a bad decision. Bishop to d3 was just simply a much better move in the position. This was, in fact, move 40. So after this move, you make both of the players, once this next pair of moves is going to be made on the board, is going to get an additional 30 minutes on the clock. So bishop to d3, just simply keep the tension in the position, maintain the two bishops against the bishop and knight in the position. The knight is pretty passive, defending this pawn on a b6, attacked by the bishop on e3. The bishop on f3, sure, I mean, yes, that is forcing white to allocate some valuable resources to the defense, that this bishop on d3 defending the pawn on e4. Nevertheless, I have ideas of rook to f1, kick the bishop away, and then going back to c4 to set up a very nice attack against the pawn on f7. So definitely, as we see the tension being maintained in the position, we understand that white is still in the driver's seat. The game continues. Black probably has to go something like knight to f6, and we're going to see the trade of these two pawns, and then with this b pawn on the board, this passed pawn just ready to run down the board and potentially become a queen. Well, this is going to be a difficult defensive task for black. So I see b5 followed by king to b4, things of this nature. This is looking good for white. At the same time, from an objective perspective, it's still more or less balanced. From a practical perspective, I have to say I give it to white any time of the day. He did not do that. He played the move king, bishop to f7, king to f7, rook to f1, setting up this pin. He was tempted by the fact that he's going to be up a pawn. The problem is after king to e6 or b5 first, rook to f3 and king to e6, despite the fact that white is a pawn up, white has the better coordination of a rook and bishop versus a rook and knight, which we know, at least that's what our Russian trainers, Russian school trainers have told us. Queen and knight is better than queen and bishop. Rook and bishop is better than rook and knight. But in this particular case, the rook is just simply too active. And perhaps this is something that Fabiano missed the move, the idea of black playing the move b5 and supporting the rook coming to c4, and that's going to be enough compensation for equality. Bishop to g5, control the square f6. If you go rook to f5, for example, now I can just simply go knight to f6, defend the pawn on h5, and attack the pawn on e4 at the same time. This is giving black enough compensation. Bishop to g5, rook to c4, rook to e3. Black is just simply too active. He has enough compensation for the lost material. Knight to f6, forcing the trade, because otherwise you lose the pawn on e4, rook to f3, rook to e3, and now we see a nice repetition. The game finishes in a draw. Fabiano, with the white pieces in game one, makes a draw against Bogdan Daniel Deac. Maybe, coming out of the opening, a successful opening, I have to say, for Fabiano. He got a very practical advantage out of the opening. He knew what he's supposed to do. He knew the type of positions that he wants to strive for. He must be slightly disappointed at the same time. It's just the beginning of the tournament. There are still so many games left. Tomorrow, he will be facing the newly crowned world champion, Liren, and that's going to be an amazing game to follow. I will be doing commentary on the St. Louis Chess Club's official YouTube channel, and after that, hopefully, I'm going to be coming back with another recap of Fabiano's play. Liren versus Fabiano Caruana coming up tomorrow. I will see you guys then.